Welcome to the Three Rivers podcast for Wednesday, April 10th. I am your host, Ed Troop. Glad you could join us here this evening on Oneberg Facebook Live and live on our Oneberg YouTube channel. Coming up on today's show, we're going to talk to Josh Roundtree in just a little bit, and we're going to be discussing all kind of Pittsburgh sports topics for this week. The Pittsburgh Pirates are now 9-3, first place in the NL Central as they head to Philadelphia tomorrow to start a 4-game weekend series against the Phillies. We'll also continue to talk about the Steelers' offseason and the NFL draft, which is just 2 weeks away tomorrow for the Black and Gold as they enter the 2024 NFL draft with the 20th pick overall. Josh and I will discuss the top players at the offensive line, wide receiver, and defensive back positions. And finally, the NCAA men's and women's basketball crowned their champions this past weekend and this past Monday night. South Carolina on the women's side defeating Iowa and Caitlin Clark, and on the men's side, UConn repeats as NCAA champs. Dan Hurley, the head coach. Do we like him or do we not like him? Josh and I will also talk about that in just a little bit. So let's go ahead and bring Josh Roundtree on here with us this afternoon. There he is right here on my right. And Josh, we're going to get all those nice words off the screen so we can actually see you. There you go. Josh.
Some people might prefer the words stay there, Ed, but that's fine.
They might, my man. They might. Josh is currently the director of communications with the WPGA. He also is a host and play-by-play guy with 93.7 FM, The Fan, and KDKA Radio as well, and the play-by-play man for the Pitt women's basketball program in the ACC network. Josh, that's a lot. Did I miss any titles for you?
There's a few more in there, but for time's sake, we can just leave it at that. But yeah, that's the main ones. That's the gist of it, I guess, right now. So that's perfect, Ed.
You are a busy man, my friend, and Josh and I go way back. Both went to Point Park, but just different time periods. Josh was after us. But the Trib Live High School Sports Network, Josh and I have worked together, have done games for a number of years there as well. And always a lot of fun doing those WPIL games.
Yeah, we do go back quite a ways. And yeah, I think one of my first games, maybe my first game post-COVID was with you alongside. So that was definitely after sitting idle for like a year. That was a very welcomed experience, and we've had some pretty good games, I think, over the years. You and I have got to do some WPL football games and things like that. So it's always been fun working with you, and I'm glad that you got the opportunity to do something like this and talk some sports. And yeah, we do go back a little ways now. Geez, it's probably been, 15 years, something like that, since all that started. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, at least going back to that time period. You mentioned that COVID game. I remember that game. It was at Upper St. Clair. And Josh and I both had masks on, and we're doing the game. We have no clue what to expect. And the stands were all separated. Only parents were able to be there, and they had to sit 2 rows in between each other. It was such a weird atmosphere, man. But I remember sitting next to you and thinking, man, I hope Josh doesn't have COVID, and I hope I don't have COVID, giving him COVID after this. But that's right, man. We were the first ones to work right after that all shut down. Well, hey, let's talk Pirates, Josh. 9-3, the Pirates' first place in the NL Central, off to a tremendous start despite the loss the other night, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, or afternoon, I should say, against the Tigers in Game 2 of that series. But the Buccos, man, they are hot right now, 9-3 atop the NL Central. I think the common question in Pittsburgh right now is, do you think they can sustain this?
It's a great question. Last year they started 20-8. And I remember saying at the time, they were pitching well, they were hitting well, they were running the bases exceptionally well. Really, the only thing they weren't doing great in that first month was their defense. That actually kind of got righted as the season went on a little bit better. But everything else immediately tanked. And I said at the time, doing Pirates pre- and post-game shows then, that I felt like because they had so many things going at once, that there wasn't going to be this massive fall off the cliff, that, maybe they don't hit for a little while, maybe the pitching stumbles, but they would be able to sustain it. I was wrong. Pretty much everything fell off a cliff all at once simultaneously once they got to 20-8. And it took them essentially 2 months to rebound and look like a pretty good team after that 2-month stretch where they looked like, arguably the worst team in baseball. So I'm a little cautious when I hear the word sustainable now, because that was the word that I threw out there day after day after day talking about the Pirates a year ago around this time. So, but what I will say is I think that the additions, and the biggest one I think is in-house with O'Neal Cruz, a guy that they didn't have when their season really went into a tank last year. Um, to have him back as a fixture at the top of that lineup, no matter where he ends up hitting as this season goes, he played he plays such a big role, I think, as just more than
Right.
just the WAR, more than the analytics will say. To have a guy like that running out there every single day is invaluable. And you can put a metric on it, you can put a number on it, but at the end of the day, I felt like losing O'Neal Cruz last year, even though I know the WAR numbers say things differently. I felt like if he plays, they probably win 7, 8, 9, 10 more games just by having his presence in the lineup, because they really didn't have that leadoff man. They lost a lot of power. They lost some base running, and they lost the guy that has the most insane tools, skill set that you're going to find. So, look, is it sustainable? I think it's more sustainable now than it was last year, because of the addition of that guy, because of the emergence of Ke'Bryan Hayes. And I think their lineup is much more sound from top to bottom right now. But again, I'm cautious with it because sustainability was the big word that I threw out there a year ago, and I ended up being proven wrong when things didn't go so well.
Yeah, I mean, I think us all as Pirate fans or have followed the Pirates over the years, we always just kind of keep pinching ourselves when we get out to these hot starts. And I remember last year, the teams they played early on, those first couple months of the season, weren't that great of baseball teams. They got into more of their meat of the schedule, the Brewers and the Cubs and the Dodgers and those types of teams in June and July. And that's when they struggled. You mentioned O'Neal Cruz and that injury. That certainly didn't help them from a year ago. The pitching fell apart. But so far, so good. The Orioles are a pretty decent team. The Tigers are pretty decent. We know Miami won their first game the other night, so maybe you don't take too much from that. The Nationals have been up and down a little bit so far this season. So the competition that they have faced has not been that bad, but it also hasn't been that great either. I think time will tell as they get into more of the meat of their schedule.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the way that they played against Baltimore, I mean, I think Baltimore's a really good team,
Right.
and an organization really, Ed, that they need to emulate. There's no reason that they can't become the next Orioles. Baltimore has a payroll that's 25th in baseball. The Pirates are 29th. There is no reason the Pirates can't do exactly what Baltimore is doing right now after a 100-win season a year ago. I mean, they have been the blueprint of small payroll successful baseball because they had some really, really lean years. I mean, they were, as bad as the Pirates were for a couple of years there, they were probably even worse than the Pirates were, and they're a little bit ahead of schedule right now than the Pirates are. But I think this year you could see this Pirates team take steps towards being what Baltimore currently is, and that, quite frankly, right now for Baltimore is, in the minds of a lot of people, a World Series contender. I mean, I think that's where they can be. I mean, they just called up, the Holiday kid here today, but man, I mean, they can be a really exceptional team, and I think the Pirates have the ability and have the people in house right now to get pretty close to that. And if they add a little bit here and there, they have a real opportunity to get there and be a team like that.
Some of the offensive stars, Josh, so far this season for the Pirates, Connor Joe leads the team in batting average, 324 going into tomorrow. Of course, Pirates idle today as they travel to Philadelphia to get ready for that 4-game set, as I mentioned at the Open. Brian Reynolds, 10 RBIs. Ke'Bryan Hayes, 15 hits in 12 games. Pretty good. And last week we talked about Michael A. Taylor being kind of the underdog, if you will, the non-common name. Well, I'm going to throw another one at you here for this week. How about Edward Olivares? 3 home runs to lead the Pirates so far this season. They acquired him from the Kansas City Royals. He's in his 4th season, and he has 3 home runs in the first 12 games.
Yeah, he's been a definite bright spot. And I think, that goes back to what I mentioned with their lineup. I mean, a guy like Michael A. Taylor is a late addition. Edward Olivares, I don't know what they were expecting out of a guy like that coming into the year, maybe just a bench role player guy. But, the opportunities that he's had, he's taken advantage. And, I think right now what you're seeing with this team is healthy competition. I think that there is enough depth that it can sustain. And again, I use that word cautiously, but because of the depth that they have right now from a lineup standpoint, I do think that offensively they can withstand, if O'Neal Cruz gets into a slump, if Ke'Bryan Hayes gets into a slump, if Brian Reynolds, they have guys that can pick up. And Olivares is one of those guys. Like, you can put him in off the bench and you can start him. You can use him in a variety of ways. And, you're not going to lose too much, I think, in the outfield, obviously, when you do that. And he can play a really, really important role. And this team's going to hit home runs, much more so than last year. I think we're seeing that, early on. And as the weather gets warmer, they're only going to get better in that. But when they were down in Florida, and again, spring training stats have to be taken with a grain of salt, but they led the majors in spring training home runs. And I don't think that's a fluke. I think this team has some pop. I think they have some power. What Ke'Bryan Hayes did in the back half of last year, I mean, that really unlocked something for him from a power standpoint and driving the baseball. He was hitting the ball hard all year last year, and then he was just hitting it to other guys. He was hitting it to fielders. And then all of a sudden he makes a couple of tweaks, and now he's starting to launch the ball into gaps and over fences. So I do think that guys like Olivares and Michael A. Taylor, I don't know if they're going to be this consistent throughout the longevity of a season, but if they peak in Valley a little bit and you plug and play here and there, you have the depth that makes this a pretty good lineup from start to finish.
Yeah, there's definitely some fun names that we've been throwing around here with Taylor, Olivares, and there are others as well. In fact, on the pitching side, here's another one for you. Martin Perez. He's been a standout so far. 1-0, 1.89 ERA, 15 strikeouts and 2 starts. I had a no decision in there, but he's been a bright spot. Mitch Keller, a little bit of rough of a start, picked up a win here recently, 1-1 on the year. 5.29 ERA, 17 strikeouts so far on the season. But a guy like Perez, Keller, I mean, the pitching so far has been very solid for this team. I think it's been a little bit of a surprise. I think coming into the season, if there were any question marks, it was around this starting rotation.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think if you look at the strengths and weaknesses, I mean, the strengths were supposed to be the lineup, right? And the relief pitching. Well, the relief pitching has had its struggles for sure, particularly with David Bednar. The hitting has been solid enough, no doubt about that. But the starting pitching, that's the biggest thing, right? You can hit the baseball, but if you don't have the pitching, you're just going to lose a bunch of high-scoring games. Right now, they're getting the pitching, and Martin Perez has been really, really good. Mitch Keller has had some struggles early on, and I think 1-2 games isn't anything to get in a twist about. When we're talking about a guy like that, he is coming off the contract. You wonder, are guys thinking about that a little bit? Does it take some time to settle in? There was one of those games where he was pitching in some cold weather as well in DC. So I don't know. I mean, I wait probably until, starting pitchers are 5-6 starts in to really start to say, hey, this is trending in this direction or that direction. You don't know what guys have been working on in spring training, but, the starting rotation, I mean, Marco Gonzalez has, performed really, really well.
Yep.
I saw Jared Jones pitch on opening day in person. It was my first chance getting to see him in person, and he is, I think, going to be the real deal. There's a guy coming up. There's a guy in Indy right now that's going to be the real deal in Mr. Skeens. Paul Skeens is going to be really, really good. Jared Jones might not be that far behind. Like, they might have a really, really good 1-2 punch. And then, if Keller is able to get back to where Mitch Keller can be and should be, boy, that makes them really tough 1-3. And then you add in Martin Perez and Marco Gonzalez. We saw Bailey Falter come back with a really good start his last time out. Suddenly, surprisingly, there's some pitching depth. And this organization kind of got blasted for not having enough starting pitching depth. As it's turned out, that starting pitching depth right now doesn't look all that bad, especially when you keep in mind 7 of their 8 top prospects, Ed, are pitchers.
Wow.
There's a lot of pitching coming up through the pipeline, headlined by the guy who right now is the number 1 recruit in the number 1 prospect in minor league baseball, Paul Skeens.
Yeah, a lot of it, at the beginning of the season, we knew the financial part of this, that they were going to keep Skeens off the opening day roster until, mid-June into July. But I think the theme was, can they survive? Can they survive the first 2 months and just still play 500 or better baseball until Skeens can get up here and give them that extra punch? And so far, throughout the first 12 games of the season, they're okay, 9-3. They're doing very well. And you mentioned it, Josh. Couldn't agree with you more. You get Skeens up here, you add him into the mix, they're going to be just that much better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's going to be like the best trade deadline acquisition that you could possibly make, and it's going to come probably well before the trade deadline. I mean, he's going to be a major league ready player that you're going to be able to, toss at the top of any lineup. And I'll tell you, I mean, if this team is able to sustain this and they are able to get to a postseason, for instance, this year, I go back to say the year that David Price got called up. And he was this young phenom who just sort of took over in the playoffs, and people were blown away at this guy. I mean, that's what Paul Skeens can do. I think he can come up to the majors right now and be a very, very effective pitcher. I will caution people, I think the expectation is going to be that this guy's going to come up and throw a no-hitter every single time he touches the mound in Major League Baseball. It might not work that way early on. There's guys that throw hard. There's guys that are big. The league will catch up to you at some point. But I think the large body of work for Paul Skeens will be a massive shot of life to this Pirates team. The question right now, whose spot does he take in the rotation? If he does come up relatively soon and these guys are all pitching sort of the way that they have been pitching, where do you insert him? I mean, that's going to be the question right now. But for a guy like Skeens, you make that room.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get your thoughts on David Bednar. That's been the hot topic here today. He comes into yesterday's game. The Pirates have the lead against the Tigers in the ninth, and it's the third of 4 blown saves for David Bednar. And, some control issues early on in this season. He admitted that after the game in the post-game interview. But I wanted to get your thoughts, Josh. He got booed pretty big at PNC Park, and it became a story today, mainly because of Rowdy Tellez, who is, of course, the big free agent pickup that they had. He spoke up in the locker room, stopped the interview, and basically cautioned Pirate fans from basically booing the hometown kid, booing him out of the ballpark. Is that a good look, a bad look? What's your thoughts on that as far as Therese stepping in and speaking up?
Yeah, I think when you look at what Rowdy did, the one thing I will say, there's 2 things to this, really. One, I don't think that we have to worry about there being leadership or a lack of leadership in the Pirates clubhouse. I mean, that was a leadership move from a guy who's relatively new to this team. So whether you agree with him, disagree with him, like it, don't like it, whatever, it's a leadership play. And he's stepping in. He knows that his guy, David Bednar, is about to get a tough line of questioning. And he's stepping in and saying, hey, look, we don't like that this guy's getting booed. We believe in him. We trust in him, etc. So in that aspect, I really don't have a problem with what he did or what he said. I will say, when you're a fan and you pay a ticket to go watch $1 million people perform for you and they don't perform well, this is what happens. People will boo. I don't necessarily love it. I don't know that it would be something that I would do. In fact, I know that it wouldn't be something that I personally would do, especially to a guy like that who's been nothing but good so far. So I don't love it. But again, I'm not going to tell people what they do when they pay money to go watch $1 million athletes play for $1 billion owner on a multi-billion dollar team. I mean, that is the price that you pay when you enter into what you enter into. But as far as the Tellez move, the one thing I will say, I think there's more people now talking about Rowdy Tellez than they are talking about David Bednar's struggles. They're talking about booing and not David Bednar, and if there's a problem potentially here with David Bednar. So a little bit of, hey, look over here from Rowdy Tellez, and that goes back to the leadership thing too. I think he knew that, somebody needed to step in and say, hey, look, we're still winning. We're still playing well. We're a good team. This is a good pitcher. We're going to be fine. And I agree with that. I think more than anything, Ed, with Bednar right now, the guy missed a lot of spring training. He was down. I think they might benefit by putting him down on the IL for, a 10-day stint or whatever. Let him get right. Let him figure it out. Let Chapman run in that 9th inning role for the time being. And then get David Bednar back in there because something obviously is up. I mean, I think that's very, very obvious. The control issues are certainly a problem right now. And look, that happens. It's fine. What's going to make it worse is continuing to run him out there when he's not right. Nip it in the bud now. We're talking April 10th. Send him to the IL for a quick stint, whatever you need to do. Pull him out of high leverage situations for the time being, then get him back in there when he's good to go.
I agree. And, look at Bednar's track record, 58 saves the last 2 seasons. Pretty remarkable. And, to come out the 3 out of the first 4 save opportunities and struggle. And it's been pretty consistent to struggle, too. He's missing the strike zone. The control is just not there. And I agree, Josh. I think you look at possibly an injury maybe going on there, rest him up. It's early enough in the season. And that's why he brought Chapman in, as you said, bring him in and plug him in that role. So, while the Pirates, again, 9-3, first place in the NL Central, they will head to Philadelphia for a 4-game set starting tomorrow against the Phillies. Let's switch gears, Josh, onto the Steelers. The draft is just 2 weeks from tomorrow. Hard to believe. The Steelers have the 20th pick, and in recent weeks, we've discussed the draft quite a bit here on the podcast, and we've kind of identified 3 spots that at least we feel that the Steelers are going to go after in the first pick at number 20. That's offensive line, wide receiver, or defensive back. Got a few players I wanted to highlight at those positions, get your thoughts on, but first and foremost, where do you think the Steelers will go with that 20th pick?
It's interesting right now because I feel like they have multiple obvious holes that could be filled. I wonder. I think they can survive with the offensive line being relatively what it is right now. They need to get a center. There's no doubt about that. They need to get a center at some point. I think they could upgrade the left tackle or right tackle position, however you want to say that, however it works out. Broderick Jones is going to play one of the tackles. He seems like he's going to be a really good player. Dan Moore Jr. is probably the player that should be the swing guy instead of the lead tackle out there, especially on the blind side of Russell Wilson or Justin Fields or whoever ends up winning the spot. But, I think they can get by from an offensive line standpoint generally where they are. The one area that really, really worries me right now is corner. They are not good enough at the corner position right now. They're not even close to good enough. And I know a lot of people love Joey Porter Jr. I like him a lot. I think he's going to be an exceptional player for them for a very long time. You need more than one really good corner when you're going up against Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow, when you're going up against Lamar Jackson, when you're going up against Deshaun Watson. And those are just your AFC North opponents. You need 2 solid corners out there. I don't know that they have that. I don't know what Dante Jackson's role is going to be. I think it was Ryan Clark today said that he thinks Jackson's going to be a slot corner for them. Well, if he's a slot corner, who's going to be the outside guy? The other question along that line, Ed, is with corner, do you want to throw a second-year guy and a rookie out there as your starting corners right off the bat? I don't know if you have any choice in the matter. Again, I am concerned about their offensive line. I'm more concerned about them giving up a lot of points because their corner play isn't good enough. You can only mask so much with a good pass rush and Minkah Fitzpatrick back there. They have to get better on the outside, and they're going to be certainly tested throughout the course of this year, one game after another, if they don't find a way to find a little bit more, I think, in the corner spot.
Yeah, you mentioned the AFC North too, and I mean, just loaded when you look at the Bengals, the Ravens, and even the Browns for that matter, from an offensive standpoint and the weapons that those teams have. Definitely agree with you there, Josh. A couple players at these positions that I kind of was looking at today at the center position should be available around that 20th pick, possibly from Oregon as the big center, Jackson Powles Johnson, 6'3", 328 as a center. Is one that stands out. If they go the wide receiver route recently here, Adonai Mitchell, 6'2", 205-pound wide receiver from Texas has been mentioned a lot around that 20th pick. If they go corner, here's a name for you from Iowa, a corner, Cooper DeJean. He's 6 foot, 203 pounds. Pretty big size there as well at that corner position. And then another offensive tackle from Georgia, Amarius Mims, 6'8", 340. At the tackle position. Another tackle, a bulldog that could be there. So you could have Broderick Jones going back on the other side, put this Mims on the other side at 6'8", 340. I don't know, man. You know me, Josh, well enough for us doing the football games over the years. I'm an offensive line guy. I like my big fellas. And, man, when I see Mims at 6'8", 340, he's the one that stands out from Georgia.
Yeah, and then you would have a couple of Georgia tackles out there. I'm curious, too, with the tackle position. Darnell Washington, really, really good blocker. Really good blocker. Super, super big. He's probably, 30 pounds away from being the size of an NFL offensive tackle. They just brought another tight end in. Are they maybe looking at Darnell Washington and saying, that's a guy who could transition really, really well to being a fluid tackle for us instead of a tight end? I don't know that they're there yet, but I do wonder if Darnell Washington, maybe from a route running standpoint, a pass catching standpoint, would be better suited for more of a blocking role, and that would be at offensive tackle. Again, I don't know that that's what's going to happen. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but, it would be interesting if they bookend Georgia tackles. They love the way that Georgia plays, obviously. I think Arthur Smith's offense now is going to love the way that Georgia runs the football. So it wouldn't surprise me in that regard if they went tackle in the first round. If I had to bet right now, if I'm, running down the river, so to say, and putting money on what they're going to take first, probably tackle is the one that I would bet on highest. Center is very, very possible, I think, as well. Philosophically, I don't see them taking a receiver. It's not something that they've done a ton of over the years. I mean, Santonio Holmes, obviously, and Plexico Burress, but it's been a while since those guys got drafted. They don't take receivers in the first round very, very often.
Right.
And that said, they have shown here with Omar Khan and Andy Weidel in this new, different regime that they're not afraid to be a different type of team from a personnel building standpoint than they have been in the past. I just feel like organizationally they're going to think, hey, if we get a receiver in the second round or even the third round, that he can play. But they definitely need another receiver. I don't think that they can walk in there with George Pickens as the certified number one guy, given the guys that they have around him. Not that others can't step up, but they could definitely use another playmaker on the outside for Russell Wilson or Justin Fields.
I think they were banking on Tyler Boyd, the Clarendon kid from Cincinnati, to be signed here in the offseason. And those talks obviously broke down. The Steelers were at one point, from what we've read, and Boyd was at another, and they weren't near what they wanted to pay him. But I think Boyd was going to be that other receiver they were going to bring in. And there's been talk about trading for some of these other guys too, which I chuckle at. Like, they're going to go and get some of these big names from these other positions at wide receiver. I agree. I think it's going to be a draft pick. And the Steelers, one thing they have done, not so much drafting in the first round, but Josh, they've gotten it later in the rounds. They've gotten some really good receivers later on in the draft, fourth, fifth, sixth round. So, this is a deep draft at all positions, and they might be able to find a playmaker a little bit later on.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that's, and again, that goes back to the, philosophical views of the organization. Deontay Johnson was a guy, they got him in the third rounds. They were able to, obviously Antonio Brown is the big one that everybody talks about. And it is, that is a storyline that a lot of people talk about. If you go through year by year, rounds 3 through 7 receivers, it's kind of hit or miss for them. They have been able to hit on a few. They've missed on a few. For your Antonio Browns, there's a Lima Swede. For, a Deontay Johnson, there's a Sammy Coates. Like, there have been guys that there have been guys that haven't worked out for them from pretty good spots in the draft.
Josh, you got some deep cuts there, my man. When you pull it out of Sammy Coates, and Lima Swede, man, those are some deep cuts of Steeler misses at the wide receiver position. Martavis Bryant, but he had a lot of skill. We know what his issues were off the field that led him out of here, but he's another guy that was a pretty good draft pick there a little bit later on. Josh, before we move on, we have a few more minutes left with you. Grade the Steelers offseason so far. Give them a grade. What do you think so far through the first wave of free agency, some of the moves that they've made, some of the players that they let go as well?
That's a really interesting question, because the biggest factor in this is, how will this all work out with the quarterback spot? If it works out and Russell Wilson and or Justin Fields are really, really good, it's an A. No doubt about it. I would say right now I would put it somewhere in the B category. I don't think that they're a better team from a skill position standpoint. I think they're worse on the outside at corner. I think they're worse at receiver than they were a year ago. So in that standpoint, I don't think they're as good of a team there. I think they got better at linebacker with the addition of Patrick Queen. And the quarterback position, it's hard not to say that they're a better team from a quarterback room standpoint than what they were. I'm skeptical on what we're going to see out of Russell Wilson. I don't know. I think it's a gamble that they're taking, to be honest, in that regard. If the gamble pays off, then Omar Khan looks like an absolute genius, and I think they probably realized after 2 years of Kenny Pickett that there was probably a lid on how good he could be, and that this guy's going to make them better. So right now, I would say it's somewhere in the B category that I would give them. I do think that they're going to be a more physical football team this year. And I think that they're going to be getting better quarterback play game in and game out, at least more dynamic quarterback play than they have. But there's a lot of things that need to happen between now and when they kick off in September in game number 1 that Omar Khan and Andy Weidel and company need to address, because this team, as it currently stands right now, they have some major, major voids that need to be addressed.
They will look to try to fill in some of those voids. 2 weeks from tomorrow is the first round of the NFL draft. Hard to believe, like I said, Josh, at the top, that we were just 2 weeks away from draft day. And, of course, after that comes mini camp in May into early June, training camp in July, and another NFL season, August into September. Hey, I want to finish up with you, Josh, and talk a little NCAA basketball with you. Of course, you're the play-by-play guy for the Pitt. And, by the way, I'm wearing the right shirt for you here this morning.
Thank you.
See, we always do the podcast in the morning, and I'm now 31 minutes in. And I did not say morning until now. I thought I was almost going to get through it. But here this evening, wearing the right shirt for you. Play-by-play guy for women's basketball for Pitt. So you've obviously been around the women's game here the last few years in the ACC with the ACC network as well. Talk a little bit about, of course, South Carolina. They defeat Iowa on the women's side. But Caitlin Clark was the main story this basketball season and the tournament. She finishes up her career with 30 points in that championship game and really, put the women's NCAA tournament on the map, the game. And now there's talk that her going to the WNBA is being compared to Larry Bird and Magic Johnson when they entered the NBA in the 80s, and how that turned the NBA around with those two going. Now they're talking about the WNBA possibly also taking a big turn and getting a big interest with Clark entering the game.
Yeah, I mean, here's a perfect example. The Indiana Fever, who have the number 1 pick, they're going to take Caitlin Clark. They were on national TV once last year. They are already scheduled to be on national TV 36 times this coming season. Wow. And you know why? That's because 19 million people just watched Caitlin Clark play in the national championship game. She's fantastic. I can tell you, as somebody that's followed Pitt for the last 6 years as the play-by-play voice, there's no player that I've wanted to see play more in person, and no player that I have feared playing more in person than Caitlin Clark. She is such a unique player. She's a unicorn in what she can do. She's the female Steph Curry. You could go down the list of descriptives, or maybe Steph Curry is the male Caitlin Clark. I don't know, but she is a special, special talent who I think there's been really great players for a long time in women's basketball. I don't know why the sport hasn't gotten the attention that it's gotten this year, because there have been really good players before. Quite frankly, I don't really care anymore, because it's a sport that should have more attention to it. It's played in a pure fundamental basketball standpoint fashion. And I think for basketball enthusiasts, it's exactly what you want. It's not like the NBA, where there is at times lackluster defense and you have players just relying solely on 3-pointers and whatnot, even though Caitlin Clark's pretty good at shooting those. Right. It is a great product, and it's great to see the exposure finally come. And then obviously, on the other side, people like Dawn Staley and what she's been able to do at South Carolina, and Tara Vanderveer at Stanford, who just retired last night as well, and Gino Auriemma. And there's really, really great coaches on the women's side. And obviously my role that we have at Pitt with a first-year head coach this past season, trying to build the program back up. There's really exciting basketball, really good basketball that comes to the Peterson Event Center all winter long on the women's side and the men's side, as we've seen here in the last couple of years with Coach Capel. So I just encourage people to come out, check out local basketball. in this area, because if you liked what you saw, if you're one of the 19 million people who liked what you saw this past weekend, we got it for you in Pittsburgh. We have women's basketball for you at a very, very high level conference in the ACC right here in Pittsburgh. And it's a great time. Like personally, from my standpoint, I love it. I mean, I love being involved in women's basketball right now because it feels like it's just sort of the tip of the iceberg on how big this sport can get.
I agree. And the ratings came out today as well this morning that for the first time ever, the NCAA women's national title game had bigger viewership than the men's on Monday night. So Sunday, 3:00 primetime spot for them, but primetime spot for the men as well on Monday night, playing at 9:00. And in that game, UConn, they repeat as champions. They defeat Purdue 75-60. Dan Hurley, back-to-back. No question the job he's done at UConn. But I wanted to pose the question to you. Do we like Dan Hurley or do we not like Dan Hurley? He definitely comes off a little arrogant, doesn't he?
I think Dan Hurley is the perfect example of a guy who, if you're a fan of the team that he coaches, you absolutely love Dan Hurley. If you don't like the team that Dan Hurley coaches, you probably can't stand Danny Hurley. And I can understand why people can't stand Danny Hurley. He is eccentric. He is arrogant. Would I want Danny Hurley coaching my team? Yes. He just won 2 championships in a row. Who wouldn't want Danny Hurley coaching their team? He's obviously done a remarkable job. He is different. He is, I think, at times a little annoying for sure. But he's a really, really exceptional basketball coach. I mean, there's just no way around that. He did such a great job at Rhode Island. And you remember he was obviously in the mix here at Pitt as well and ends up going to UConn. And he's just done a remarkable job. I mean, they were truly dominant in the tournament. I mean, the most point, as far as point margin goes, the highest point margin difference in NCAA tournament history. I mean, the guy, he got that team moving into a machine. I thought Purdue had a real chance, especially with Edey, but they gave Edey his in the championship game. Their game plan was terrific around that. They said, hey, we're going to let that guy do what he does. If he scores 30, he scores 30, but the other guys are only going to score 30 against us, and we're going to go score 80. Right. And that's pretty much what ended up happening. And that's the belief that he has in his players. And, again, he's not on your team. You don't like him. If he is on your team, you absolutely love him. And UConn fans love him right now for sure.
There's another name that echoes that with me, and that's Jim Harbaugh in football. So
yeah.
If Jim Harbaugh is your guy, or John Harbaugh for that matter, either Harbaugh brother, you love them. They're great coaches, but man, when you're on the other side watching them, maybe not so much of a fan. Good stuff, Josh. Hey, let's finish up real quick. I want to get your thoughts on the Masters, of course, starting tomorrow in Augusta. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your role? You're the director of communication with the WPGA. Tell us a little bit about that organization, what you do, Josh, and then give us your thoughts on the Masters. I think it's a perfect segue with Masters kicking off tomorrow, Thursday.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. It's, I started about 3 months ago, nearly now, as the director of communication for the Western Pennsylvania Golf Association. It was just a great opportunity for me at the time. And I just essentially, we have a lot of written content about the amateur golf scene here, the junior golf scene, senior golf scene in Western Pennsylvania. Our footprint is essentially split the state down the middle. To the left, that's all of us. We run all of the amateur events. So we'll be out very, very active at all of the amateur, junior, senior, youth events throughout the region. And we're going to write about it as well. We've had some really great stories already come through at WPGA.org, and just talked to Palmer Jackson and Rocco Salvitti. Palmer, a Franklin Regional grad who is, a great junior player here. Same thing with Rocco Salvitti, who's from down your way. He's a Cannonsburg kid who went to Central Catholic, and now he's at Notre Dame along with Palmer Jackson. One of them is a grad student on his way out. The other's a freshman getting his career started. So we're going to be telling stories like that, Western Pennsylvania golf scene. And with the Masters, there's actually a really good local connection. Neil Shipley, who went to Central Catholic and then James Madison and now Ohio State. He's going to be teeing off tomorrow. I think it's 11:32 something, or 11:38 maybe. Neil Shipley tees off at the Masters. He's a Western PA kid right from Pittsburgh, PA, and he's going to be playing as an amateur in the Masters. So I'm really looking forward to watching him play. I think at my desk at work, I'm probably going to have a couple of monitors going with the Masters feed. But no, I love the event. It's something that is someone who's now really, really involved in the game of golf. It's the marquee event, and it's just beautiful, right? It's just so aesthetically pleasing. The Masters, first and foremost, and this year is a really good field, man. I don't know. I've had a couple of people say, "Who do you think is going to win the Masters?" I don't know. The field is so good. Who do I want to see make a run at it? Tiger, of course. I want to see Tiger make a run. The theater of that would just be outrageous if that were to happen. But man, Rory has had a bad run in Masters, and I wonder maybe if he's due. I just wonder if he's due. I wouldn't bet on it, but I wonder if that guy maybe has a surprise for us all. It's been a very, very weird year. I don't know if you watched the Full Swing documentary, things between
Right.
Rory and the PGA and Live, and he got so caught up in that. Maybe this is a chance for him to have like an actual good feel moment at the Masters. I think that would be a pretty exceptional story if it happens. I'm looking forward to it, though. It's going to be an awesome 4 days.
It's one of the most beautiful settings in all of sports, America, whatever you want to say. And one of my favorite catch lines from Jim Nantz, too, a tradition unlike any other. So that's always been my favorite catch line over the years from Jim Nantz, who, of course, didn't do the NCAA basketball tournament for the first time this year, but is still the voice of the Masters. So we'll hear him all weekend long there with the Masters coverage. Josh, we're going to have to end it there with you. We appreciate you coming on, man. Enjoyed it. Would love to have you back on here in the future. And enjoy your new role with the WPGA. 93.7 FM, The Fan, KDKA Radio, Pitt Women's Basketball, and the ACC Network. Whew, that's a lot. You're a busy man, my friend. Busy man.
Hey, always can make time for you, though, Ed. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. And, look forward to doing it again sometime, my man. Thank you.
All right, we'll be back on next week, which will be 1 week away from the NFL draft. So make sure you get logged on next Wednesday for another edition of the Three Rivers podcast. That's Josh Roundtree. I'm Ed Troop signing off for now. Have a great evening, everyone.